Shorebreak Sounds.
Welcome to Over the Falls podcast, episode number 47. This week we sat down with Emma O'Sullivan, who is the founder of the incredible DPJ Foundation, which is a mental health farming charity. We discuss her early life, her career as a teacher, family, and the very emotional and brave story of how and why the DPJ Foundation was started, and all of the amazing work that they are doing as an organisation. Just a quick heads up that we have an open and honest conversation about suicide and the early signs within this podcast. This week's episode is sponsored by Cattle Strength. Based in Felin Fach, they offer PT sessions, classes, kids classes, and online training. Find them on Instagram, Facebook, and www.cattlestrength.com. So we'll start with learning a bit about you.
Yeah.
And then go on to like the amazing work you do with DPJ and the reasons behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So you've driven up from Pembrokeshire today?
Yeah.
Yeah. Born and raised in Pembrokeshire?
Yes. So born and raised on the farm that I still currently live on. I moved out for a little while, but then came back. I was drawn back, and we live there with my parents live on the farm, and my grandmother lives on the farm too.
Amazing. I love Pembrokeshire.
Beautiful place.
It is, isn't it? I've been there quite a lot, and it's stunning.
I always feel really lucky to live there.
Yeah.
Like everyone, I remember being in school and everyone's like, I'm going to move away. I'm going to live in a city. And I was like, I'm going to stay exactly where I am.
Got everything there.
Yeah.
Beaches. It's amazing scenery.
Yeah.
It's just a really, really nice part of the world.
Close-knit community as well.
Yeah. So whereabouts are you in Pembrokeshire?
Clarbeston Road. So just outside Haverfordwest in a small village. Yeah, farming village just out there.
Okay. So it's a working farm you're on then?
Yeah, well, it was up until 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So actually not long after Dan passed away, really, I think everyone had a bit of a mindset shift around everything. TB was a massive problem on our farm as well. We've been down with TB for a number of years, so we were losing cows, unable to buy cows in, and all the restrictions that go with that. And I think my dad just sort of turned around and said, you know what, life's too short for this, and gradually sort of got rid of the cows until eventually there were no cows left. So we went down to nothing, and he went back contracting. And then when I moved back, I decided to buy some sheep. Started with 2, and now we've got about 30. But it's good. It keeps us occupied, and it's something nice that the kids get involved with. And so we're sort of a working farm, but not officially.
Not officially.
Not properly.
Was it a dairy farm before then with all the cows?
Yeah. So where I live, in the house I live, was the old milking parlour. And I grew up, and so when I was younger, we were contracting and we were milking. And then when I was very young, a decision was made to stop the contracting and just go into milking and focus on that. So my grandfather and my dad then milked, all the time, up until I was, up until 7 years ago. And it was, very interesting. It was a great way of life growing up, but it was very different. We did dad and granddad and my mum and heavily involved in it, and out at 5 o'clock every morning and not in until 7 o'clock every night. And, you learn to kind of fend for yourself a little bit and get on with things because you have to. And it's an amazing way to grow up.
I can imagine, for kids, being outside, being amongst the animals.
Yeah.
But it's not your full-time job now, is it? As in, you're a teacher, right?
Yeah, so I teach full-time. I'm a primary school teacher. Yeah, so I've taught primary for the last 16 years nearly. It's my full. I sort of say that I teach to fund my sheep habit at the moment. That's kind of my thing.
You're not getting any money back from the sheep.
I'm not making any money from sheep.
No,
not the slightest. No, not the sort of sheep I buy. I'm not like a proper sheep farmer. I see one that looks really nice. I'm like, oh, that's cute. I'm going to buy that one. And they're not necessarily always the best sheep to keep because they're hard to lamb.
I can imagine.
Hard to shear. The fluffy ones are nice, but they're not easy to shear. So we shear them all ourselves. I do all that. So it's
What made you want to go into teaching?
To be honest, it was sort of something that's just always was. I can't even remember that sort of pinpoint. I remember sort of being told, you've got to go work experience in school. So went to work experience, and my uncle was a head teacher, so I went to his school. It was easy. There wasn't many options for work experience in Pembrokeshire, really. We're not I haven't got a huge sort of pot of jobs to be able to go and do, really. So I went to the school and I really enjoyed it. And I remember the teacher there at the time said, you'd be really good at this. So I was like, there you are, I'll just do that. And then that was it. And I didn't really ever think of anything different. But strangely, I don't think I could ever do anything else. I think I took a bit of time out to run DPJ for a short time when it got really busy. But it was like, no, I think I need to be in that classroom. And I think I like the way that I can make a difference and sort of, just to
And
enjoy it.
Has it been cut like there has in Ceredigion? Is it got a lot tighter? Has it got a lot harder?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I've taught in the same school for the last 15 years, up until July. And, we've gone through, lots of different things really over the years. I've seen huge changes in staff, and then we had redundancies towards the end of last year, which was a really stressful time. We were all kind of told our job was at risk, and that was really worrying. And then all of a sudden these decisions of, I don't know what else I can do. I said I'm not very good at making money out of sheep, so I wasn't sure I could go and do that full time. But it was worrying what to do, and then an opportunity came up and I moved jobs, and sort of still teaching, but in a bit more of a management role now, which has been a really good sort of shift for me, I think, since September. So but it's been hard. It's hard for education. It's really difficult.
It is, because my wife works in a local school here as a teaching assistant, and they're so understaffed.
Oh yeah,
they can't teach.
I've gone from a school where I had, over 30 children in my class and no LSA. And I feel when I started my new class and I got told I had an LSA, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I remember texting all my teacher friends like, guys, I got an LSA, this is great. And I do, and it makes such a difference. It's huge. I've got children in my class who need that additional support, and she's there to do that for them. Whereas when I'm by myself with 32 children, it's impossible. And, I worry hugely for the future of the children who are in those classes who don't have those teaching assistants, because what support are they going to get going forward? And, we've gone are the days where you just had your kind of, small sign of sort of additional learning needs. You've now got children who are coming in with no English. And, I've got several children who I've taught over the years who've got no English, and they need that extra support. And how are they going to do it? It's scary times, really scary.
Funding needs to go into education way more. It's the start of your life.
Yeah.
It's got to be at the top, and it's just not.
And the impact, I think, of COVID, I still don't think it's really understood how much of that has impacted children. Yeah. And I think that ultimately, if we don't start ploughing money into that right now, we're going to see huge problems. We think we're in problems at the moment with things. I think in the future, I really worry for that generation and how that's going to look going forward. The drive and the motivation for children to want to learn is just not there. They had that time over COVID, I think, where huge amounts of them didn't have to do it and weren't doing it at home. And now they've sort of lost that love for it. That sort of the love for reading that I remember having as a child is gone, because children are just on iPads and laptops all the time. And, it's really difficult to kind of you want children to find that pleasure in it. But, times have changed.
It snaps everyone out of their habits, doesn't it? It just sort of changed everything, COVID. It was strange times basically. We've talked about it quite a lot on this podcast, and it's everyone had hugely different experiences, but for kids there's like a big gap there of 2 years of no real socializing. It's gonna have a massive effect on them, isn't it?
And I think I live in what I can only describe as the back end of nowhere. We have no neighbours. And we were really lucky in the sense of COVID that we bubbled up, with my grandmother lived at the top of the road and my mum and dad, and we had to sort of stay together because there was no way my nan was going to be by herself. That was not going to happen. So, we sort of bubbled up together, but the children had no socialisation at all. And so my youngest, who was 1 at the time when we went into lockdown, didn't see anybody, and it's really affected her. And only now really we're starting to see her come out of that, really, because she wouldn't speak to people. She wouldn't speak. She's at home, she's chatterbox, but actually to people, and even people like her grandfather who worked throughout COVID, she wouldn't speak to him because she didn't see him, and they miss those vital kind of things. And we see that massively now in education.
We're quite lucky because our kids are similar ages, and they're young enough to not remember it. Yeah. So we were lucky.
Yeah. I feel a bit sort of guilty in one sense, because I think on the one hand I actually quite enjoyed it. Okay. It's like not, I feel like bad saying that, but I did. I felt like the time I was in a bit of a cross period. I'd finished, I'd taken some time out of teaching to go and work with DPJ. And so I wasn't actually in school doing the online teaching. And then obviously everything went quiet. So I was home, and I actually had this time with the children that I'd never had before. We walked miles, we spent time together. I used my sort of expertise as a teacher to do these things with them that, we really loved and enjoyed. And we had every morning we would do that. And then we had miles around us that we could literally walk for miles and not see anybody. And we could, and it's guilty sort of feeling that. And then sort of seeing the impact it's had on children, that I have contact with who weren't so lucky. You feel that sense of guilt of like, oh gosh, I wish they could have had that experience, because it could have been something in a sense that could have been quite positive, you know, for those relationships and building those relationships with parents, that children don't get the opportunity to do so much anymore.
No.
In rural areas as well, like ours, I suppose, you know, Aberystwyth or Pembrokeshire, it was easy compared to some people, because I always thought of, like, say, a single mother in a high-rise flat in Birmingham, say.
Yeah.
And there's us going on these, like, lovely walks. My youngest was born in March, so she was just literally like a lockdown baby.
Yeah.
And then I had 6 weeks off instead of, say, the 2. So I felt lucky as well. I just felt lucky to spend time with my eldest daughter and youngest, who was born on lockdown, essentially. But yeah, people have just such different sort of stories on the COVID thing, isn't it? I had a positive experience, but I understand that most people probably didn't.
Yeah. I remember going to visit a friend of mine who lived by herself and was working from home, and she lived alone. And I remember literally going, I didn't leave the house actually for a long time, because you know, everything was sort of done for us. We didn't have to leave, really. My mum broke her arm, so I ended up having to go and do her shopping. And I remember sort of buying something for a friend of mine and going to drop it outside a house, and she was the other side of the window, and we both just stood there crying. And I was like, this is horrendous. You know, this is absolutely ridiculous. I've known her since we were like 10, and we can't even just speak to each other. And it was just the weirdest of times. It really was. But, you know, like I said, I feel the impact of that, I think we're going to be looking at that, you know, educationally for a long, long time.
I think the figure's going to come out in years and years when they've really analysed it. Yeah, and you're right. I think we're scratching the surface on probably the damage that's been done, because I always think about someone who's 15, 16, and then they miss those key 2 to 3 years of, like, growing up, going out, befriending people. But you can look at every stage of the ages, and it would affect everybody differently. So you've got key stages of primary school that they missed. I'm
really worried about the mental well-being of that age group, because I can see a huge cohort of children here over the last, so sort of, I'm thinking about like your 9, 10 and 11-year-olds now who just have got no resilience. Like there is no resilience. And it is this whole thing of there's no kind of drive to want to push. It's like the minute something gets hard, done, out, check out. And it's really, really concerning that if they're kind of doing that at that age, you know, and they're not, and if they haven't learned how to be resilient now, how is that going to reflect when they are 21, 22, 23 and facing the crap that life throws at you, essentially? Even they don't have the resilience to deal with that. You know, where's that going to go? And that really worries me.
The no's and the rejections that they're naturally going to get in life.
They can't deal with it. They cannot deal with it.
No.
Because they didn't have to. You know, those key kind of years in school where, you know, they're up against that social kind of thing where they're being told, well, no, you know, and you have to deal with that rejection. You have to deal with those issues around friendship and those kind of things that you learn through play as a child. They just didn't have those opportunities. And yeah, I really wonder where that's going to hit us in a few years' time.
Or like some of them didn't do their GCSEs. I remember speaking to someone recently and they were like, oh, I didn't do my GCSEs.
It's mad, isn't it?
Like,
whoa.
Yeah. There's a couple of students we had,
That's what it was. The students. And
they missed those 16 to 18.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it?
Like those years were awesome.
Yeah, like they're the best years ever, weren't they? Yeah, it's mad.
Just and they didn't have it.
And I feel sad for them. They didn't get that. It's sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's sad.
Let's talk about DPJ. So, can you tell us a little bit about it and how it was founded?
Yep. So, do you want me to go right back to the beginning?
Let's do it.
If possible, yeah.
Yeah, definitely, okay. Yeah. So, I met Dan, my husband. Gosh, I can't even think what year it was, 2010. I'd just come back from travelling. I'd done my sort of university degree and I was in uni and everything was great. And then a friend of mine was like, I'm going to go to Thailand in 2 weeks' time. Do you want to come? And I was like, yes, I will, because I'm a little bit haphazard with decisions sometimes. So much to the detriment of my family who were like, what are you doing? I went to Thailand and did a bit of travelling and it was great, and then came home. And just sort of started living life and really enjoying it as a young person, working and with money in my pocket. It was a bit dangerous. And then went to a rugby tournament up in Newport, Pembrokeshire, and we're in the pub and there was a load of us there, and met a mutual friend, and that's where I met Dan. So he was an agricultural contractor, a little bit older than me. We exchanged numbers, as you did back then, and when you met people in the pub. And then it was the middle of the summer, so it was silage. So, of course, as a contractor, silage comes first. And I didn't see Dan for, 6-8 weeks, probably more than that again, because couldn't go and meet up with someone because he had to go and pick up grass. As a farmer's daughter, I kind of knew this and it was fine, and we kept in contact. And it went really from there. We just sort of really quickly got to know each other really well, and just, as you do, just like love blossomed, I suppose, and that was it. Didn't really ever recognise that anything was anything other than okay at that point. I think looking back, he was probably really good at masking a lot of things, but also like a lot of things were hidden. I think there was a lot of shame about things perhaps that had happened in his past with his mental health, and that was stuff he didn't want to share, which, you know, was his prerogative, and there wasn't really any discussions around mental health at that point in time, so it didn't really cross my mind to kind of ask about those sorts of things. Flash forward, I found myself pregnant. And that was a bit of a funny thing, because I was still, you know, I was 24, I was young, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is sort of happened really quick. But actually it seemed like the right thing, so there we are. And that's when things started to sort of show a little bit, and I was like, oh, okay, there's like, you know, things perhaps weren't quite as right as I thought they were. He just seemed to get really anxious about everything and would worry about the smallest things, whereas I was a little bit like, whatever, you know, life will be what it will be, and that's it. We had Mally. And things sort of carried on, and there was, again, it was like sort of little things just niggling all the time, and he just couldn't seem to settle. In hindsight, he had really severe social anxiety and was quite obviously suffering with depression, but he masked those things really well. And because there weren't those conversations, I didn't know that that's what it was. I just thought he was a bit awkward, you know, typical male farming stock who's sort of just like happy chatting grass and silage, but put him out of his comfort zone in clean, tidy clothes, and he sort of goes to pot a little bit. Things just sort of gradually then got really worse, and I just remember sort of just adapting, I suppose, the way that I lived my life to just make sure that he was okay. So we stopped really going places. We didn't really go out to a lot of places because I didn't want him to sort of feel that social anxiety and that awkwardness, and it wouldn't be worth it for him. And then things sort of really got sort of gradually a lot worse, really. Mally was quite small, and I remember sort of the weather being really, really poor, and we lived the bottoms of a mountain. We were on a family small holding in a caravan, and it was bloody freezing. And I remember saying, I can't keep her here. She's so small, it was too cold. So we went to go and stay with my mum and dad, and he wasn't in a very good state of mind at that point. And I didn't really know what was going on, but I was like, oh, we've got a child. He's not going to do anything, you know, it's not going to happen. So we went to my mum and dad's house. I put Mally into bed, opened up the laptop to do some work, and there was like, he'd been looking at YouTube videos on how to tie a noose. So of course, like, I had this like sudden just absolute dread of like, oh my God, what's gonna happen? My dad came up and he's like, what's wrong? So I was screaming, and I was like, look, I found this. And I was like, but I don't want to tell him about it. And I don't know why, but in my head I was like, if I tell him I've seen this, it's gonna make him worse, and it's gonna make him do it. So I rang around, and I got some people to go up and go and speak to him, and he was safe and he was okay, but we never spoke about it, and I never told him that that is what I'd seen. I just, in my head, it was like, right, he wants to kill himself, and I need to do whatever I can to stop that. So this just went on then for years of me just basically just doing everything I could to make sure that he felt okay mentally. So like I said, we went even worse. We wouldn't really go anywhere. I did all the food shopping. He was self-employed, and was finding that quite stressful. You know, the ability to kind of get money in from people and things was quite hard. So I sort of took on all the financial, you know, strains of everything. I bought a house for us because I felt like if I bought a house and I took on the mortgage and things, that would make sure he had a safe place and things. And ultimately, all I did was just mask this real issue for years, really. Tristan came along, and then it sort of intensified, really. All of a sudden, we had these two small children. I was trying to manage life and the children, and then he was trying to manage what obviously was quite severe mental health issues, and it was all just sort of this spiraling mess that just kept going and going until eventually then in July 2016, things actually, weirdly enough, that weekend had been quite good. We'd been on a tractor run where, you know, get loads of vintage tractors together, and I'd organised it for the playgroup that the children were in. And the fact he'd gone on that itself was like a miracle. It was, you know, great that he'd been there, and, you know, he was actually really happy. And I remember coming back thinking, oh my God, you know, this might be like a real turning point. We might finally be be able to move forward with everything. And then he said that night, he's like, oh, I'm going to go to the pub. And I was like, oh, okay, this is different. You know, he's not sort of one to socialise in the pub, or wasn't a drinker. And then he went up the pub and then came back really late and was just really, really angry and really upset. And I couldn't really sort of understand what it was that had gone wrong, but he was just annoyed with this person and that person. And I knew that alcohol wasn't a good mix with him. You know, like we know now that depression and alcohol are a very terrible mix. But at that point, I just thought alcohol wasn't good for him, essentially. So I sort of said, you know, have a cup of tea, go to bed, you know, that kind of thing, and just tried to sort of, again, just brush over it and whatever else have you. Woke up the next morning, did what I always did, took the kids, went and got shopping, came back, and he was still in a bit of a state. So this went on, and then on Monday then he was still just really kind of not happy. The come down from the hangover was just awful, and it just made him everything so much worse. So I went to school, and while I was in school I had a text and it said, I'm not coping very well. And I was like, oh, okay. This was like almost like the first admission of things were just not good. And up until that point, you know, there really hadn't been an admission that things were not very good for him mentally. So I did my usual thing of, it's fine, you know, I'm going to make you a steak and have a nice supper and everything will be great, and just try and make things happy. I just wanted my children to be okay and the house to be happy. So I got home and did all that, and then he said about late, 10 o'clock at night, he said, I'm going to go speak to my nan. And this wasn't unusual for him. He had a really close relationship with his nan, so I thought that was it. So off he went. I went into bed and woke up at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning to a phone call, and he just said, I'm just going to go and see my mum. And I was like, it's really late, just come home, it's really late. And he said, I love you, don't you? And I was like, yeah, I know, that's fine, and whatever, just come home. And put the phone down, and that was the last time I spoke to him. So I woke up about 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was his day to look after the kids. So we'd kind of arranged it that the kids were really good for him. Like, he adored the children. And in my mind, it was like, right, if he spends 2 days a week with the children looking after them, that's going to be good for him mentally. It'll keep him safe and it'll stop him from killing himself. So he looked after the kids on a Monday and Tuesday, and then we organised it with family members for the rest of the week then. So it was his day to look after the kids, and no matter what mood he was in or whatever was going on, he'd always be there. So the fact that he hadn't come home, oh my God, immediately, it was just like alarm bells. And I remember ringing around and just saying, Dan hasn't come home. And I just remember just being a little bit like, let's keep it upbeat because I don't want people to panic. So I was like, just wondering if you'd seen him and whatever else have you. And nobody had known where he was. And then I rang my mum and I was like, I need to go and find him. So he took my car because he had no fuel in his truck. So I jumped in his truck, and I remember just feeling sick. And I don't know why, but I just knew where I had to go. So where we had been living up in the caravan, I knew he'd probably gone there. He was really drawn to that place, and it was really like home for him. So I called in a garage, and I remember like putting fuel in and chatting to the person like it was the most normal thing in the world, but all the time just having this feeling of something's going to be really bad, really, really bad. I got up then, drove down the lane, I drove around the corner, and I was greeted by a load of police cars. And I just remember this policeman coming up to me, and he just kept saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I was like, what are you sorry for? Why are you sorry? Why are you telling me you're sorry? And he said, I'm really sorry. He said, but your husband has died. And he's hung himself on the tree outside the caravan where we've been living. And I just remember this, he had like, the policeman had like a gilet on. And I remember holding on to it. And I remember thinking afterwards, this was really, really ridiculous thing to think. But I was like, I'm really sorry, because I shook him. I was shaking him. And I was like, what do you mean? And he was just like, kept saying, I'm so sorry. So I turned and I ran. He just ran away. I ran into the fields, and I sat in the fields, and I rang my mum. And by this time, the police had contacted my mum because they were obviously looking for me while I was driving up there. And she said, you need to come home. You need to come home. And so that's just, everything just changed, like in an instant. Just remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, like my kids, what the hell am I going to say to my children? There was Mally, who was 4, Tristan was 14 months old. And I just remember this thing of being like, oh my God, you're a widow. I was like, I'm 27 and I was a widow. And it was just this horrendous thing that is just awful. I got in the car, much to everyone's annoyance. And I drove, and it was a good 30-minute trip home, and I don't know how I made it home, if I'm totally honest, but I did. I drove home. I remember going past, and because I was in his truck, people were waving because they thought I was him. And I remember a friend of his drove past and stopped me, and he stood with his dad, and I had to tell one of his best friends that he'd just been found hung. I had to call over to his nan and tell his nan that it had happened, and then I drove home. And I got home, and I'm really lucky. I've got the most wonderful family, and they were all there straight away. And Mally was in playgroup. I sent her to playgroup in the hope that everything would just be a normal day. And I said, I've got to go and speak to her. I've got to tell her. She was 4, but God, she was so astute at that age. She was very like on the ball. So I went and picked her up from playgroup and took her up to Llysfran Dam, which is a dam sort of not far from us, and you could drive right up to the top, and we sat as high as we could possibly get. And I was like, oh my God, how do I tell this child what has happened? And I just said, like, I'm really sorry, Mally, but daddy's died and he's passed away and he's no longer with us. And she was like, but he wasn't ill. What, there's nothing wrong with him. And I said, no, there wasn't, but you couldn't see anything. And it was almost at that point, it was like, yeah, he was ill, actually. Do you know what? This thing just went in my head. It was like, he was ill. He was really bloody ill. And this is an illness, and it is something that, was really awful. And I said to her, no, he was ill, but you just couldn't see it. And she said, but I didn't get to say goodbye. And this was like her biggest thing, is she just wanted to say goodbye. And she was like, why don't we go and get a ladder? And she would go and get a ladder and we'd climb it, because in her head, he was on the clouds. And she just wanted to go up and say goodbye. And it was just heartbreaking being able to tell her that she just couldn't say goodbye. And I think still to this day, I think both of the children still feel absolutely bereft, that they were ripped of that chance of just saying goodbye. And so she turned around to me, and we were both obviously crying, and she turned around and said, we're going to be okay, Mummy, we're going to be okay. And I still remind her that of this day because I said to her, we will be okay, and we will. And then really quickly, things just escalated. Police were there, and he'd left a note, and all these sort of things. And in the note, it was so long, and it was really sort of jumbled and things like that. And there was one part of it that just really stuck out to me. And he said, you weren't able to help me, but you can try and help somebody else. And I remember reading that. And in hindsight, knowing Dan, he probably didn't expect me to go quite as far as I've gone. But it was just in my head. It was like, yeah, do you know what? I can do something about this. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and I was like, oh my God, all this has happened. And I was like, I'm going to do something about it. And that's where it all began, really.
Wow. Thanks so much for sharing that. It's it really hit. I got 2 young children as well, and it's like, it's really heavy. But thanks so much for sharing that. And something so incredible has come out of something so shit.
Yeah.
So, I commend you hugely for that.
There's an amazing legacy there now in his name, in your kid's dad's name.
Yeah, and that's
an amazing thing what you've done.
Yeah, and I remember kind of saying, sort of, there was all sort of people around the house and things like that. And I remember just saying, this isn't fair. None of this is fair. It's not fair that I'm going through this. It's not fair that my kids are growing up without a dad. And I remember like one of the first things that went through my head, like really weirdly, was like, oh my God, who's going to walk Mally down the aisle? And it was like really ridiculous. But it was like, this sort of, that's the things that your dad is that's the dad does that. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm as practical as the next person, and I can paint and I can do DIY and whatever. But it's those things that you want your dad there for. And that just absolutely broke me, that it was just like, what, that my poor children were not going to get to have that. And that really just broke me. And I said, I will do anything at this point in time just to try and avoid any family having to go through this, because what we went through at that time was just horrendous.
Yeah. I'm thinking when you're talking then, it's like, it's a typical sort of male attitude, typical farming, agricultural attitude of not talking.
Yeah.
Head down, ass up, just get on with it. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Whereas what you've set up now is showing that it's okay, that you're not all right, and that you are struggling.
Yeah.
And that, it's an amazing thing what you've done. So DPJ Foundation now, what do you offer people? Can you tell us a little bit about the help that you can provide people?
Yeah. So there's sort of, with everything that I've done with DPJ, there's always been a reason behind it. It's never just been just for the sake of it. So very quickly straight away I decided I was going to set up a foundation. Originally the idea was to set up a foundation to be able to provide funds to other charities, but I couldn't find any charities that were doing anything that I thought was any use for farmers, if I'm totally honest. I started doing fundraising, started putting money in a bit of a bank account, and set up this organisation, literally days after he died, really, with the idea that I would work out what was best to do. And so throughout kind of a strange coincidence of sort of things, I kind of worked it out, I suppose. I'd had done a lot of research, had a bit of time, and wasn't sleeping very well. So I'd stay up all night, and if I wasn't painting, I painted everything. It's like, oh my God, my house was just totally painted, everything, just to keep my brain occupied, because I just couldn't cope with going to bed and what was kind of facing my brain when I went to sleep. So I did a lot of reading. And one of the things that kind of really resonated with me, especially as a teacher, was the fact that, you know, education was just not, it was just a huge gap in mental health education. You know, people didn't know how to deal with it. And when I looked at my kind of own experience, I had no idea. I thought that a cup of tea and like a good steak dinner fixed everything, when actually all I was doing was masking this problem. Never once did I sit down and sort of say to him, tell me what's going on, you know, and I allowed him to talk. I just wanted everything to be fixed. I was a massive fixer, as we all are. That's our human kind of nature. We just want to fix things and make things better. But actually, what I didn't understand at that point in time is I couldn't have fixed him. It wasn't my job to fix him. It was his job to fix himself. But he needed to be able to have those tools to be able to do that. So it was the same with suicide. You know, that day that I saw that video about the noose, I wish I would have known what I knew now. I don't have regrets, because there's no point. I would absolutely destroy my own self mentally doing that. But what I would like to do, and what I've set out to do, is make sure that people know that, God, if you see something like that, this is what you do. You have open conversations about suicide. You use the word suicide. You talk about it. And you, if you're worried about someone, you ask somebody, are you at risk of suicide? And I just, like, when I was reading up about this, I was like, oh my God, it makes sense. Like, that's obvious. So one of the first things I did was look at providing mental health training to people in the farming community. So I looked at things like vets and feed reps and anybody who was out and about with farmers' wives, farmers themselves, anybody who had that contact, to be able to sort of, if they've got those concerns, have those conversations with them and know what to say, have that confidence that I just didn't have. So we started off doing that. Started off using kind of the generic sort of mental health first aid. I got trained as a mental health first aider. I went through the training myself, and I sat there and I was thinking, do you know what? Actually, this is okay. Like, it's okay. It's good training, but it's not good enough. Like, I'm sitting here, and one of the things they said within their training was like, encourage people to get outside and get some fresh air. I was like, if I tell a farmer to go outside and get fresh air, they're going to like tell me to piss off,
exactly.
essentially.
That's all they know.
Yeah, they need to be sitting inside, like doing essentially whatever they want to do. So I kind of used my skills as a teacher, went back and I rewrote the whole training and rewrote everything to suit the farming community and what you know, we need to do and what suits us and the issues that face us, because the issues that face the farming community are so different. You know, isolation's massive problem, absolutely huge issue. You know, the financial worries of being self-employed, you know, all of these different things, they're just very kind of, the weather, it sounds ridiculous, and we all know that the weather impacts us, but as a teacher, if it's raining, I just keep the children inside at break time. A farmer doesn't have that choice. They're outside in all weathers, no matter what. And, you know, those sorts of things are so specific to the farming community. It felt really important to me that they needed that specific training around that. So that was the first part of it. And to this day, we still train people, and we've trained people all over the UK, and I'm one of the leading trainers within the agricultural sector, providing training to all sorts of people from, you know, like I said, vets, feed reps, Co-op, for example, have an agricultural team that we've trained up, and we've been to kind of various estates all over the UK training up the, you know, workers on that estate and things like that. So that's a massive part of our charity, is being able to make people aware of what to do within those situations, to have those open and honest conversations around suicide. And then not long after that, so it's all happened really quickly. So Jan passed away in July. By the October, we did our first training session. By the November, I think everyone around me was a little bit like concerned about my mental well-being. I think they thought I was plowing myself into this charity and whatever. I took a couple of months off work, and they were like, you need to kind of make sure you're okay. So they're like, you need to go to the doctor. So I was like, okay, I'll go to the doctor. So I went to the doctor, and I just said to the doctor, like, everyone's really concerned. Like, I kept getting told all the time, you're not grieving. Like, you're not grieving. And I just said, how do I grieve? What do I do? I don't know. I'm 27. This is the first time I've lost anybody. I don't know how to grieve. I don't know. Part of me, I remember going to Greece when I was a child and seeing those little women in the corner, you know, on their dressed all in black and sat in the chair. And I was like, would you be happy if I was doing that? Like, what do you want me to do? So the doctor's like, oh, you know, I'll put you forward for counselling. You can have some bereavement counselling. I was like, okay. So they gave me a number. I rang up the number, spoke to an answer phone, left a message on the answer phone, and then they rang me back a week later. And they said a week later, oh, thank you very much. We've had your referral. We've got a waiting list. We'll see you in about 8 months' time. So this was a little bit like, oh, hold on a second. And I started having conversations with people, and they were all like, yeah, this is it. Like, this is long waiting list wherever you want to go. So I started to do a bit of research, and obviously, you know, talking therapy is one of the best ways of dealing with mental health. But my idea of talking therapies was quite weird. I think I'd been watching too many films as a child, and I thought I was going to be going into a room with like a very bear with me because this is very detailed, a red chaise lounge. I was adamant it was going to be like this, right? And I was adamant I'd like have to lie down. I was like going to be a man there with a clipboard. He was going to be wearing a waistcoat. Like I'd had this very obscure view of what talking therapies was. Yeah. So I managed to find this sort of private place in Narberth, and I was like, right, I'm just going to go and hopefully and see what happens and see if it helps. There wasn't a red chaise lounge and there wasn't a man with a beard and a waistcoat. It was like much sitting like we are right now. This woman who was just a little bit older than me, and it was a game changer. It was huge. It was the ability to just let everything go. And things that had happened over the years that I just hadn't ever told anybody. You know, there are so many different parts of this story that I'd never spoken about because it was just too personal and it was too private. And to get that out to somebody was just this massive relief. And I was like, oh my God, everybody should be doing this. Like everybody should be having this sort of counselling. But obviously, an 8-month waiting list was not ideal. And like, I just kept thinking, oh my God, if Dan would have gone to the doctors and told them that he was in trouble and struggling, and he would have been told 8 months down the line, he'd have probably carried on and killed himself anyway, because in his mind, that would be, they don't care about me and that kind of thing. So I started looking at how I could make a service that could provide counselling for farmers in a way that they would be happy with. So if they had the same point of view as me, as like, oh, it's a red chaise lounge and that kind of thing, they're not going to go. But if I can get somebody to go and sit and talk to them in a field or walk with them while they're checking their stock and do the counselling that way, it would be in a way that they felt comfortable. You know, farmers aren't great with kind of like, if they're on the farm, having to get changed into tidy clothes and go into the town centre to go to an office. I wanted it to be in a way that was so flexible that we could do whatever that farmer wanted to make them have that help. So
it's a really good idea to do it when they're walking, doing their day-to-day
definitely
chores.
Yeah. And you know,
idea.
I know when I'm talking to children in school, you know, sitting opposite somebody is really hard to have that conversation sometimes, unless you're confident. But if I take them for a walk on the playground, you know, they'll talk flat out, and they will. And I do it on the football pitch with the girls. You know, if they're having an off day, we'll just do a stretch of the pitch, and it'll all come out. And yeah, it was just really important for me. So I started talking to people and started saying like, this is what I want to do. And I remember going to a trustee meeting and with this piece of paper of like, we're going to have a 24-hour call line, but we're also going to have a text service because lots of people don't like talking on the phone. And within 24 hours of that person contacting us, they're going to have to speak to a counsellor, because not only when they ring up though, they're going to speak to a human being, because leaving a message on an answer phone of, my husband killed himself a few weeks ago and I really need help, that's crap. It's really crap. And then not to have anyone ring you back within a week was just like, yeah. And in all honesty, if it wasn't for the fact I had a really tight family around me, and it sounds really ridiculous, but the funeral director was just incredible. Like, he was great, and he gave me all the information that I needed. And without that, I would have been totally lost. And I always think to myself, my God, you know, if that's somebody else who wasn't in that position, they would have been so vulnerable, like really vulnerable at that point in time, and really susceptible to suicide themselves. So it's just about making sure it's quick, it's efficient, and it's a way that suits people. So we launched that service in January 2018. We started off originally only ever going to be in Pembrokeshire, and then all of a sudden people started calling from Carmarthenshire, and then they started calling from Powys, and then within kind of I had a 5-year plan from 2018 that we would sort of within 5 years we'd be covering the whole of Wales, and we covered the whole of Wales within 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and we've supported in excess of over 1,000 people in the farming community with fully funded counselling since that point. And it's not just 6 sessions and you're done, off you go. It's you have as many sessions as you need, because you're unique and your story and your whatever you're going through is unique. So you might need 2 or 3 sessions, but you also might need 22 sessions. And we support people of all ages. So we've had children as young as 9 and 10, and people as old as 87 and 88 having counselling, because there's no box or limit to what that is. And people have it in lots of different ways. We have people who have text counselling because they feel better just getting it out over text message. We have people who go out into the farms and sit there. And I remember one of the first ones ever. It's obviously quite small when it started, and it was just me really doing it on my own with trustees. And the woman rang me and she was like, I said, you know, was it okay? Everything all right? Just want to check up you're safe, because we wanted to make sure the counsellors were safe when they were going on farms. And she's like, yeah, there was a sheep under the table. I was like, yeah, get used to it. It's fine. Don't worry. I was like, it'll all be good. And I have to say, like, the counsellors that we've got on board with us are just incredible. You know, they really are so flexible and willing to work with people in any way that we possibly can to make sure it works for them. So
You're doing an amazing job.
Amazing.
It is. I'm just sitting here in awe of what you're doing. You've probably saved so many people without realising.
All I wanted to do was just make sure that people had somewhere to turn. I think that was the biggest part of it. And it just feels really, it's really strange because I haven't done something like this in a long time. So at one point, this was my life, and I was going out and doing interviews and different things all the time. And then when you guys got in touch and asked, I was like, oh, do you know what, this is Lesh. I haven't done anything like this for a long time. And when you sit back and you kind of like say that, you're like, oh my God, it's crazy. And I only ever wanted to just make sure that there was somebody that was available, and to know that many people have been able to have that support is just like a really overwhelming but wonderful feeling.
Well, you're doing what Dan asked.
Yeah, exactly.
He would hate this though. I just like put that out there. He was so like quiet and things, and he'd be like, Emma, what have you done? I honestly think sometimes, like when we did things like when I was on the telly and stuff, he'd be looking at it going, hey, Emma. And I was like, yeah, what is she doing? I only wanted you to do something little. But I think like then that's the testament to it, is I only wanted to set out and do something within our community, and ultimately the need of it has been there, really has. And it's, yes, it's kind of been me that sort of started it, but actually it's been developed and grown by every farmer across Wales who has supported us to get to this point, and that's some of the people that have rang up and asked for help, for the people that have fundraised, for all of our volunteers. And it's just incredible the kind of community support that has been around this. And I just feel so lucky I get to share it with so many people now.
That is amazing. Why do you think people are a little bit more susceptible maybe in the agricultural industry? You touched on a little bit like weather, and to me it seems somewhat obvious, but it just seems such a tough old life to be farming. It's
really tough, and I think there's no kind of like like my daughter's quite funny. She's like, I want to get a job, and there's all the legalities around it, isn't it? Doesn't work like that in farming. As soon as you're old enough to put wellies on, you're out there. You're either holding gates or you are herding sheep or whatever. My kids were out lambing with me all last year, and there's no kind of like age limit with it. It's not a job, it's a way of life. But it's a way of life with a really poor pay as well. The amount that we pay for food in the supermarkets and the amount that farmers get paid there's huge discrepancies between that. It's massive. The isolation is huge. When I was younger, farming has changed dramatically over even just a short space of time as 30, 40 years. So when I was younger, we spent huge amounts of time with my nan up in her kitchen making sandwiches. And when we'd have silage, we'd all stop in the field all together and everyone would eat together. And then at night time, then my nan would cook a big meal and we'd all sit around the table together and we'd all eat together. It was a real camaraderie. And there's like a rumor has it that when I was really little, I used to call my dad Richard or call anyone dad, because there were so many men around all the time. I would just call anyone dad and my dad Richard, and that's what it was like. There was just people everywhere, and that's what farming used to be like. Those days have gone. The machinery has kind of come on so much, so you don't need so many people. You haven't got the weather we used to. So, we were travelling up here today and we were chasing harvesters coming up here on the maize. We're November and we're still getting amazing because the weather's been so crap this summer. Yeah. There's so much that is just changed, that the weather's changed. The isolation element of it is massive. Gone are those days where you have people on the farm, it's just a one-man job and that's it. And quite often, I was very lucky, my mum was a farmer's wife. Granted, she worked just as hard as my dad, but she was home on the farm. So when my dad came in at lunch or they were out together, they could bat things off against each other. Huge amounts of women work. Farming women work these days, and not just on the farm. They have to get jobs outside of the farm just to pay for things. There's just so many different elements to it that are just difficult, and we're so governed by everything. You take your lambs to market this week, you're taking a massive gamble because the next week the price could be double. So it's always just this gamble of kind of you're dictated to. With milk, we were dictated to about the price we were going to be paid for our milk. We were milking those cows. We couldn't decide what we sold it for. We were told you are selling it for this price, and that price might drop by 10 pence tomorrow or whatever. Do you know what I mean? There was so much discrepancy, and I think it's not a woe is me, because I'm telling you now, farmers are like one of the best group of people you'll ever meet. They are so proud. They love what they do. They care for their animals and they care for their livelihood and their land, and it makes it that much more difficult because you have that care. Yeah. The budgets and things that have been released this week, you've got farmers all over the country who are just absolutely in pieces about it, because this isn't just a job. This is 100 years plus of our family that have farmed this farm. And then we're being told we might have to sell part of it just to pay for the tax to inherit it. It's just crazy. Yeah,
I don't really understand. So what have they actually announced? What is it? What that part of it, the inheritance thing? Because it's like a succession plan or something.
I'm not going to profess to be any sort of I'm not an expert on any of this at all, and this is very likely to change, and things, and this hearsay and whatever else have you. But essentially, farms have always been sort of, I can't think of the right word. Exempt, that's the word, sorry, yeah. Exempt for inheritance tax, essentially, because obviously the amount of, it's asset rich, isn't it? Farms are not cash rich, they're asset rich. And unfortunately, that's looking likely to change, and it's going to have a massive impact on farmers, well, every farmer, because they're saying it'll be farms that are 1 million plus, but I mean, we're not a massive farm, but we've still got acreage that will equate to that amount of money.
Of course it will.
So we don't have, I'd love to have £1 million in the bank, that'd be great, but we certainly don't. No. It's assets, and that's all it is. And it's unfortunately, it could potentially be hugely damaging. And there's a huge amount of worry, I think is the right word to say. There's worry around where this is going to go. But if there's anything that farmers are really good at, is they're good at kind of coming together. And when times get really difficult, actually, they do come together. And I really hope that this is what's going to happen going forward, is that we will come together and a solution will be made, or I
hope there's protests about it if it is going to hit the farming community.
I think there
hard,
is. I think there's, it seems to be quite sort of high profile at the moment, and it looks like there's going to be protests up in London. So we'll just have to see what happens. But I think for us at DPJ, our main job is to make sure that if farmers do feel worried and afraid, that they've got somewhere to turn to. And the call line that we run is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So even if they just want to talk and get things off our chest, all of our volunteers are Samaritan trained and are able to have those conversations. But more importantly, a huge amount of our volunteers are actually from the farming community, so they're living through this themselves, so they're able to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah, they're on the same page. They get it. As if it's not hard enough already, and you've got the government tightening the screws. Yeah.
I'll never forget when we first opened the call line, a man rang up and he was talking about TB. And he said, do you know about TB? And I was like, well, yeah. I said, we had really bad struggles with TB going back. And he said, oh, good. He said, because I rang somebody once. He said, and I spent 2 hours trying to explain what it was, and that just wasted my time. And I was like, there we go. So this is, part of it. It's just, we're such a unique thing, is making sure that when they ring up, they are speaking to someone who knows. They've got that lived experience of what these people are going through.
That's really important, though, isn't it? The last thing you want to be doing is speaking to somebody who hasn't got a clue what you're going through, what you're about, or anything like that. So and
there is an argument that you can have that conversation. I could talk to anybody about their mental well-being and things like that. That's saying, but actually, for farmers, their situation is so unique. It's really, you need to be able to understand it, because if somebody sort of came up to you, somebody and said, oh yeah, it was the weather. It's all right, it's just a bit of rain, isn't it? A bit of sun. No, the weather. Yeah. My crops aren't growing, they're underwater. I've had to we had people who've lost lambs because of the snow, and sheds got flooded and things like that. There's so many different elements to it, and having that understanding, I think, is hugely important.
Yeah. One of my questions was, how do you look after your own mental health?
So this is something I've had to learn, I think, if I'm completely honest, because I probably wasn't very good at this very early on. I ploughed everything into DPJ, and for years it was everything. I mentioned, over COVID that I took some time off, and I was sort of running DPJ because we got so big that it needed someone to run it, and I was like, I don't know if this is very good for me. DPJ has become something really positive for me, which is what I needed it to become. It needed to be something positive for me and the children. But I wasn't looking after myself. And so then, therefore, it was becoming really negative. I was driving up to North Wales 3 times a week. I was away from home a lot. And it was just so much that it was just not looking after myself. I was properly on burnout. And I remember this sounds like a proper first world problem, but I was invited up to an awards ceremony up in Birmingham. And I remember going up there and just having panic attacks the whole time. And gone from somebody who'd probably been really mentally strong and well for years to all of a sudden having panic attacks really frequently. I probably went through a period of 6 weeks where I just didn't leave the house because I was just not in a very good way. So I've had to learn how to look after my mental health. So I took up running. I was really crap at it. Got a bit better at it, and then I really enjoyed it. And then farming. It's a real Pembrokeshire word, but I'm quite kiffed. I don't know if you've heard that word.
Never heard
kiffed.
I don't think I have. No, here we go.
Kiffed is a very Pembrokeshire word, and it means you're a bit like lapsy-daisy. I fall over a lot. I'm a bit clumsy, that kind of thing. Very kiffed. So I'm kiffed. And I went through a phase of jumping over gates and stuff just because it's easier than opening a gate, obviously. But I'm not as young as I used to be, and I kept spraining my ankles all the time, so that put the run into a bit of a stop. And then I found cold water swimming in the last couple of years. I absolutely love it. I live sort of in the middle of Pembrokeshire. I'm closer to the sea than a huge amount of people, but not close enough. So I bought myself a barrel and do some ice dipping in a barrel.
Cold water therapy stuff.
Yeah.
Sounds horrendous to me. That does.
Do you know what? It's like when you get in, you think to yourself, I'm an idiot. Why am I doing this? And then when you're in it, like, you know, it's like incredible. And like we've done it. I've done it with some friends this year where we've gone in the sea every month of the year. So we start in January, we get at least one dip in.
Yep.
And we did the October one last week, and we spent like 25 minutes in the sea, and it's just like, I love it. It's
I
just
see
great.
women doing it every single morning in Aberystwyth.
Yes.
Go in every single morning, every day,
Yeah.
all the way through the year.
If I had the time, that would be me. Unfortunately, I don't, between kids and everything else, but it's really important that I've gone really good at making that time.
Perfect.
Because
You need to.
if you don't, you just, life passes you by and all of a sudden you find yourself, and I can see myself doing it. I can see myself getting ratty and stressed and getting annoyed, and, you know, I think finding that time is hugely important. And it was really nice the day, like I took the kids with me, and because like, you know, we're in Pembrokeshire, they just played on the beach, I sort of swam in the sea, and yeah, it's lovely.
It's important to be a little bit selfish as well, though. You have to.
Yeah, and
You
I think
have to
that's really
at certain
difficult
times.
actually as a parent, especially.
Yes.
Your mentality is not to be selfish, but actually it's really important to do that. And I think I've been pretty good at that in the last sort of 2 years in particular, of things like going for like a spa day, for example, and doing things like that, and just taking that time to be me. Because for so long it was either I was Miss in school, or I was mum at home, or I was Emma from DPJ. I didn't ever have that time just to be Emma. So it was just, yeah, it's really important to kind of find that. And I think I'm much better at it now than I used to be.
Good. Do you think slowly but surely, hopefully, the culture might be changing in the agricultural community? As in, I can imagine maybe a few years ago it would be looked at as like a weakness maybe to reach out and ask for some help. But can you see hopefully that is swaying now a little bit?
There's been a massive shift. I mean,
Great.
we've got a long way to go, a really long way to go. But actually, oh my God, has it made leaps and bounds. You know, very, very early on, well, literally just after Dan passed away, we had Pembrokeshire County Show, which big agricultural event. And I remember walking up there with the kids, and I was like, I'm going to go. You know, I wanted life to be normal for them. So we kept going, and loads of people like ignored me. And I was like, oh my God, this is really weird. Like, why are people not talking to me? And then they'd go behind, and then they'd go to my dad, like, how's Emma doing? And I'm like, why are they asking me? What's wrong with me? But there was this whole sort of thing around, we don't want to talk about suicide. We don't want to kind of like have that conversation. So this, if anything, kind of spurred me on a little bit. And then I was like, no, we need to talk about it. And I remember sort of going out, and I started doing talks. And I'd go, and at that point I'd have my piece of paper and I'd write it all down, and I'd go there and I'd do this talk, and I'm the first one I ever did. And this woman stood up and she was like, you know, thank you very much. And she was like, I'd like to say that actually within my family we had suicide and it's never been spoken about. We've always told everybody it was a heart problem, and it was just, it's been looked on for so many years as shame. It's always been this whole thing of like shame, and nobody wants to talk about it, when actually we have to talk about it. Don't get me wrong, I'd much rather if my kids had no idea what suicide is, but they do. So we're going to have those conversations so that hopefully when they're older, they're better prepared to deal with it than their dad was. And I think, you know, there's leaps and bounds. You know, we went every year, we have Pembrokeshire County Show. We set up a stand. The first year was a little bit slow. People were a bit thing. And all of a sudden you've got people who come up and they're like, actively happy to stand outside our stand with a big mental health sticker outside of it, and they want to fundraise for us, and they want to put stickers at the end of their lanes, and they want to kind of make people aware that they're supporting us, and that's huge. And the fact that we've had over 1,000 people, that's just 1,000 people who've had counselling. You know, we've had way more than that who've called up just to have a chat with us. So the fact that we're doing that is huge. And you know, the amount of people that come up and say, I've rang DPJ and I've had support, or they'll speak to somebody and they'll say, you know, I've rang them up and I've done that, and people are open about that, which is just huge. Yeah. My dad walks around, he wears a DPJ jumper every day. He's like, he does have other clothes, I promise, but he wears his DPJ hoodie every single day. And when he was contracting, he'd go out and people would be like, oh, I know about that, and he's like, oh yeah. And then they'll talk about it, and he'd be like, yeah, that's my daughter, she set that up. And he has people who will talk to him about their mental health, you know, and that's just, for me, it's incredible that those conversations are happening. And it's like a ripple effect. It just takes one person with a loud enough voice to make a start, and then everyone else feels like that's okay. It's just like setting that social norm, isn't it? Yeah. Much like you guys, like you said with this podcast, you know, you start those conversations, it creates that social norm, and it's huge. And if I've got a voice to do that, I will forever be doing that if that's what it takes.
Yeah, I just because I always think about the trades, just because me and Dave have trades and we've come up through that, and that's the only thing I can sort of think to relate to at the agricultural industry to, because I've never been a farmer or anything like that. And I think just the culture a few years ago was just like, you don't talk about it, head down, drive on, don't mention anything, bury it.
Generation thing as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
just sort of get on with it, isn't it? And like life goes on, and there's other people worse in the world. You know, it's not the same thing, but it's sort of. I remember being like, "Oh, I'm hungry. Oh, there's children in Africa are starving." There's always someone worse off, isn't there? But actually, it's okay to be selfish. Be like, do you know what? I'm really bad right now. And this is what I need to do. And I think people have got so much better. Unfortunately, that's quite often drawn from tragedy. So, you know, quite often it takes something horrendous to happen to kind of shift that mindset where people do start having those discussions. And it's really, really shit that you have to have that happen in order to kind of, for that to think. But actually, you can reflect on that and think, oh, this is awful, this has happened, this is terrible. Or you can be like, do you know what, this has happened and it was terrible, but this is what we're going to do now. And this is how we're going to move forward from this. And that's kind of how I've always spoken about it to the kids.
Yeah.
Okay, before we go on to some quick fires then. If someone's listening today in the farming, agricultural industry, and they need to find you, where do they find you?
So loads of places. We're basically everywhere. Somebody said to me the other day, I can't go in rural Wales without seeing you everywhere. There's bale stickers all over the place, but we've got our website, which is the dpjfoundation.co.uk, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, which I don't get because I'm too old for TikTok, I think. But
I do love TikTok.
I just don't get it. I've never felt so old in my life as when someone's like sending me. I'm like, well, I don't understand. All those things. But we've also got our contact number, which is 24/7 as well. Yeah, which is I think I've got this right. 0800 587 4262.
I'm sure we'll put it on the post.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. Yeah.
All right.
Some light-hearted quick fire questions. Are you up for that?
Yeah, this might confuse me more than anything else. So.
Might do. Put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. Just
we can discuss it. Yeah, go on in. Have you got a favourite film?
Oh, I'm not very good with films. Yes, I do. It's a kids' film.
Okay.
And I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but oh my God, what is it
We can
called?
help you. We
Describe
like
it.
films.
Right, it's little kids in it, and they're they got like a little motor car. Oh, the little boy's called Alfalfa, and he's got a sticky bit on top of his head.
Alfalfa.
It's from years ago.
Alfalfa.
Is it a film or a cartoon?
No, it's a film.
It's a film.
Yeah,
Google
and they've got the He-Man Woman Haters Club.
He-Man Woman Haters
That's what it's
Club.
called. Yeah, there's like little
I've got
kids.
something going on. Alfalfa.
Oh,
I recognise
God.
the name. I do recognise the
I can't
name.
think what it's called off the top of my head.
Alfalfa.
It's just yeah, they have a little club that they've made, and they do like a race car thing. It's like
the Little Rascals?
The Little Rascals.
Google's amazing. Because I never would have got that.
I know. Oh my God, it was good. But that's like really good, like childhood memories for me.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
We went to watch Wild Robot yesterday.
Oh,
at the
yeah,
cinema.
so good, isn't it?
You watched it?
Yeah, I took the kids the other day. It's great.
Amazing film.
I also read the book to the children in school a few years ago, so it was really nice to see like the book and and I cried at the end of it.
I never
So
even
good.
heard about it. Dave told me off air
book is
before this.
incredible.
And
I've heard of it.
I'll probably get the book now for the
You
kids,
should.
and I'll take them.
The book is really good. I read it to the kids. It's quite good, like about sustainability and things like that. So it was really good links in
Okay.
schools. So I did it in that. And then when it came out, I took the kids the other day. It was lush.
The film
good.
score is really good as well.
Yeah.
Music then. It can either be a favourite song or a favourite band or a genre.
Oh God, I like all music. Like I'm a big music person. I've always got music on all the time.
Yeah.
But there's one song in particular which is a bit out there and it's not really me, but it's Westlife, When You're Looking Like That. And the reason that I absolutely love that song is because for some reason I got remarried a couple of years ago, and on my hen do with all of my favourite people in the world, we put that song on, and it was just the best moment of my life. And then in the wedding, the DJ put it on, and I felt like a rock star. I was in my wedding dress on the stage, absolutely steaming drunk, and I had all my favourite people around me in the world just dancing to it, and it was like the best thing ever.
Good
Great.
moment.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect.
Yeah.
Favourite food? Have you got any like
Chicken.
chicken?
Just chicken.
Pan-fried chicken.
Talk to you about chicken.
Any talk of chicken, any chicken.
Yeah.
Just
Chicken
like
is-
chicken. I'm a
chicken
bit
is
of a
good.
fussy eater.
Okay.
It's like not great, but any sort of chicken. Yeah.
Okay, maybe a bit of a meat and two veg. Is it sort of like the chicken
yeah,
or?
I don't know, just any chicken. Chicken curry.
Chicken.
Curry, chicken Kiev.
Favourite cereal or breakfast?
I don't like cereal.
Don't like cereal.
Chocolate bar.
Oh, dairy milk. Or Galaxy.
Just straight dairy milk.
No, fruit or nut.
Okay.
Oh.
In the fridge or out the fridge?
Out of the fridge. Got to be soft.
Okay. We'll disagree with that one.
I love fruit. It's too snappy
You've got
sometimes.
sensitive teeth.
Yeah, and you got those almonds in there. It's an absolute nightmare in the fridge.
Cool. You happy?
Yeah, I'm really
happy with everything.
Really happy.
Yeah. Thanks very much for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. It's been really lovely.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
you.